Break 'em.
Hey, we're back with Education is Fashionable. We're in our third lesson of our fourth unit, and today we're focusing on labor unions. Getting it started with the learning targets, kind of jumbled up real quick there. We've got three of them for today. We're going to describe what a union is and the methods it uses to carry out its purpose, explain how unions gained and lost power in the 20th century, and for those of you who always get that confused, the 20th century actually means the 1900s. And then we're also going to talk about how unions negotiate with employers in modern times. So the first one sounds a little bit like the third one. Some of the things from the first one apply to the third one, but they are a little bit different, so, stick with me here. Alright, so learning target 1, describe what a union is and the methods it uses to carry out its purposes. Now, things that you need to know about too, though, because sometimes labor unions, you get some people, you talk to them, and they're like, oh, labor unions, oh, they're the worst, and some people think that they're the best thing that ever existed. And I'm not going to have that debate. I'm just giving you some basic factual background today. But let's talk about what life at the workplace was like before labor unions were around. Now, you would work anywhere from 12 to 16 hours a day, and that was for 6 days a week. Basically, the only time you ever got off was Sunday, so, you had basically no leisure time. If you or any of my students who have had European history with me before, if you've completed my current European history students, we haven't covered that yet, but we will. I mean, you basically got up and you lived for the employer, and, well, I mean, you can see why. 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, doesn't really sound like much of a life, but other things you had to deal with, dangerous working conditions, and you'd get fired if you got hurt and couldn't do your job. So, I mean, it's not like there were a whole lot of safety standards either. Oh, Johnny got his arm ripped off in the machinery. You can't do your job anymore, so have fun. You're fired. And then if you complain too much about the working conditions, well, I've got plenty of people I can pick from that aren't you and aren't as mouthy, so you're fired. So, so not a whole lot of, I guess you could say, workers' rights back then, and certainly not a whole lot of safety standards being put in place either. All right, so what is a labor union? Well, labor union is an organization of workers who collectively seek to improve wages, working conditions, benefits, job security, and really any other job-related matters. So, some accomplishments of the labor unions, like, well, what do we have to look? What did labor unions do? I mean, you even have a holiday after them. It's called Labor Day. But most of the benefits that workers in America enjoy now didn't exist prior to organized labor, and those would be things like a 5-day work week. You like only working 8 hours a day because, as we saw earlier, it was 12 to 16. I mean, it started off as 16, and then over time it gradually worked its way down to 8. You were looking at that earlier, like, 12 to 16 hours. You might be thinking, man, that's a lot of paid overtime. Nope. Overtime didn't exist back then either. Vacations, yeah, those didn't exist. Healthcare, nope. Sick leave, sick leave is you got fired. That was your leave. So you can take as much sick leave as you want because you gone. So all those things are, well, we have them today because unions actually were created and had some success. So in the beginning, unions wanted to negotiate, and obviously employers don't, because the things that unions want are always going to cost some sort of, it'd be some sort of financial burden on the employer. And so, what ends up happening is the workers do what they do best as far as trying to get their message across, and that's going to be going on strike. If you don't know what a strike is, basically all the workers in this would have been applied to the industrial era, so all the workers in a factory basically walk off the job. You can see them. They usually have signs like what's shown in this picture here, and they usually walk up and down in front of walk up and down the street on the sidewalks in front of the place of employment that they're striking against. And I've heard some really unique stories about from people who have been on strikes back in the 80s, because it's not like the people who were the 1980s, not the 1880s or something. I'm not that old. But you know, because the employers, they're not going to sit there and be like, oh yeah, I'm cool. Let's just have the factory set down. No, they try and still work it. They try and bring replacement workers in, and that doesn't go over very well at all. Don't think that that's going to be a nice relationship between you and the people who used to work there. So I mean, I heard stories where this is back when pop bottles were made of glass, and basically, you know, and of course beer bottles and things like that, because, well, whatever. You know, the people who were on strike out in front, they just, you know, all the entrances into the buildings, they just sit there and smash all these broken bottles on the ground and, you know, have fun trying to drive into the plant with, you know, not blowing out 4 tires. And of course the people, they don't care. It's whatever. Hey, you're trying to take my job over. You know, the least I can do is blow out 4 of your tires. And that's kind of like a calm version of the interaction between the two. I mean, if you ever watch the movie Hoffa, sometimes I show a little bit of it in class. I mean, you would have people who were hired by the factories. They come out with axe handles. Now, axe handles, not an actual axe blade. And it'd be like hundreds of people, and they just start beating the mess out of the protesters and the strikers. I mean, it's nuts. You look up like Jimmy Hoffa strike on YouTube, and it's Hoffa, not Jimmy Hoffa. I mean, that's the movie. Whatever. It's getting too long here. I'm gonna make this video too long if I keep reminiscing about crazy scenes in movies. But anyways, so first thing, can you do this? We're doing our check for understanding. Can you describe what a union is and the methods it uses to carry out its purpose? Now, one of them, obviously, I talked about was a strike, and the other one, I know I'm kind of doing this for you right here, but the other one, it's negotiation. And I want you to make sure, and I don't think I actually talked about it, I saved it for later. It's called collective bargaining. I'll get into it, what collective bargaining is, a little bit later in this video. So let's move on to our second learning target, explain how unions gained and lost power in the 20th century. So we're looking only at the 1900s here. So I'm still going to dip, though, into the 19th century because that's really when unions started to become popular. Or started to actually exist. I mean, they don't really start gaining power until the 1900s. Usually, you know, if we're looking at Europe, that's going to be around World War I is when they gain a lot of their power. In the United States, it's going to be that World War I to World War II time frame. So from the 1915s to around 1940, whatever. Okay, so a brief history. Union movements do start in the 1830s. It's during the Industrial Revolution, as I just kind of hinted at. And of course, employers strongly resist unions, and that's mainly because, as I talked about earlier, the things that unions want cost the employers money. And, well, what's your goal as an employer? It's to make as much money as possible. And protests by unions do get violent. We're not going to kid ourselves. I even remember in your textbook reading through it, like, people were throwing bombs into crowds and stuff. I mean, I've never seen anything like that in modern times as far as a strike goes. I mean, but man, that's nuts. But anyways, so basically what happens is because of their violent methods, they lose some of their popularity. So they had some controversial political agendas, so both of those are declining, a union membership basically to go down. And then you have somebody who basically comes in and tries to save the labor movement, and that's going to be Samuel Gompers. He tried to move labor unions forward with a different model. He basically creates the AFL, which, as you can see here, is the American Federation of Labor. He looks to improve, so his goals are improving wages, benefits, and working conditions. So these aren't any different than what we said the basic goals of a labor union were earlier. And he tries to use economic power of workers instead of legislation to do this. And some unsuccessful, basically he's unsuccessful because legal action is taken against him, and basically he has to change his tactics. So what he ends up doing is he begins to use the AFL to support pro-union candidates for government to get legislation passed that supported unions. So it's like, well, if I can't change you by trying to negotiate with you, I can get enough people behind me to vote for a specific candidate, and then those people will go into government and start passing the laws that I want to have done that are going to be in favor of the union, and I can actually get those things accomplished. So, moving on. unions gained power. We had talked about how they were decreasing in terms of membership. Now, here's some of the ways they basically do it. The other thing, too, one of the reasons why they're losing membership, too, is because of the Great Depression. And, in order to be part of a union, you have to have a job. And if you remember anything from your American history courses, the Great Depression, there weren't a whole lot of jobs. But you're still able to actually gain some power because of the basically methods we were talking about earlier. You're able to get some legislation passed. So you got the New Deal and some other reforms like the Norris-LaGuardia Act, which is in 1932, which outlaws the practice of employers only hiring workers if they agreed to join a union. So we also have the National Labor Relations Act, which is the Wagner Act, which protects the rights of the workers in the private sector to form unions and use strikes. Basically, we have the Fair Labor Standards Act, 1938, which sets a minimum wage and requires extra pay for overtime, and most child labor becomes illegal. So, sorry, it's not supposed to be, I misspoke, the LaGuardia Act, you can throw that part out where I said if they agreed to join a union. I'm going to have to go back and fix that, but anyways, I'm not even going to ask you specifically, what was the Norris-LaGuardia Act or what was the National Labor Relations Act. You just have an idea that laws were being passed in the 1900s that allowed them to go ahead and basically gain some power. I mean, I guess the one that I would take away most would be things like, they were able to go ahead and get overtime, and child labor laws basically are put in place so, that 10 or 12-year-old kid that's working in the factory is going to have to actually go to school rather than go work in the factory. We do have some backlash against unions following World War II, and it's basically you have the Taft-Hartley Act, which limits union activities. We also have some legislation that's passed that says the government can intervene if a strike threatens national security. We also have some things, too. Somehow unions became associated with communism. It's probably because some of the ideas deal with, some people lump labor unions with socialism, and socialism is tied to communism. So that's just kind of one of the ways that they go ahead and lose some of their popularity. People just basically think, oh no, Soviet Union, but whatever, not a big deal. So some other things too, we have declining participations, and main reasons for the decline is obviously we talked about the loss of reputation. We also have right to work laws that are put in place too. So Michigan is actually, I think, the most recent state that created a right to work law, and you probably have no idea what that is. Prior to right to work laws, if your employer had a labor union there, you were basically forced to join the labor union. You didn't have a choice. It's like that's just how it was. You got a job there and you automatically started having money taken out of your paycheck to go towards the labor union, and you didn't have a say about it, and that's just how it was. And so people began to become irritated because they started to feel like the labor unions weren't exactly holding up to what they were supposed to. They didn't think they were really getting their money's worth, and they wanted a way to have an opportunity to basically say, you know what, I don't want the labor union. I'm just going to keep my money. You're going to have to do better. It's still, I mean, we don't have time. This isn't the point of this class to sit here and start debating whether you should have right to work or whether there are unions or all the different things that are associated with it. You just need to know what a right to work law is. We also have some changes in the labor force too. I mean, some of the things that are still going on today is that factory workers or factory jobs they don't exist like they used to, and that's where labor unions drew almost all of their workforce from. And now they try and go with the service industry. I mean, I can name a few service jobs. I was in one. I worked in catering, and the only way I could get a job with them is if I agreed to be in their union. So technically, I was in a union for about a year. Did they do things for me? Yeah, they did. They helped me find jobs, but that's whatever. It was just kind of a different type of union. Other service-related jobs that have unions. I have come into contact with people who work as waiters and waitresses and cooks and chefs, and they belong to a union. Teachers' unions, that's considered service industry too. If you remember from our previous lesson, we talked about service-related jobs. Those are the tertiary sector, but so there are unions like that. There are a separate union for school administrators. Now, that's for public school employees. I mean, at Chandler Park, being in a charter school, I don't have the option to be in a union. Although some charter schools, like Cesar Chavez, is one locally, that was able to unionize. So who knows? I mean, I'm not trying to promote or rail against unions and at Chandler Park. That's not the point. I'm just trying to use relevant examples of things that you can relate to. So. All right, so check your understanding. Can you explain how unions were able to gain power over the course of the early 20th century? And can you explain why unions lost power in the late 20th century? So the late 20th century, so both of those, what were the things that were done? It's going to be legislation, and then I'm not going to get into it completely because you should be able to do some of this, right? I mean, you have been listening, hopefully, and paying some sort of attention, and if you haven't, well, then shame on you. You can go back and watch it again. So if you're done with that, let's move on to our third learning target, which is describe how unions negotiate with employers in modern times. Now, we already talked about one of them, which was a strike. So that's not going to be new, but union negotiating methods, we're talking about collective bargaining. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. That's the process of negotiating by a union on behalf of all their members with an employer. So the idea is that strength in numbers, all of us are going to agree to the same, like we're basically bargaining as one. And normally what's done is you have like a group of people who are chosen from amongst the workers to basically go into negotiations with the employer. So the idea is that by negotiating for all, they can provide a better deal for their workers than if they all negotiated independently. And union workers tend to get paid higher wages as a result. Granted, some people out there argue that you don't. So I've been done. But again, that's not for the sake of today's lesson. Collective bargaining. So basically, some of the things that they focus on are benefits such as health insurance and life. I don't know, maybe not life insurance, but health insurance and retirement, things like that. That's basically what they focus on now. In the past, maybe they pressed for higher wages, which that kind of has been of less importance in recent years. They might have in the past also focused on trying to increase how many vacation days you got. But anyways, the things that they focus on more today is about job security and benefits. So they basically want to keep the benefits they have and protect their retirement pensions because those are things that are slowly kind of disappearing. I don't get a pension. If I were working for a true public school, then I wouldn't have I would have a pension, but the state is kind of taking measures to maybe take that away. So who knows if maybe in 10 years if new public school teachers will even have them. It doesn't matter. Again, that's not the purpose. I'm just, again, trying to give you some examples of how negotiating tactics have changed over time. So strikes can still be used by unions to help motivate employers to come to terms with their demands. Honestly, I don't see too much in terms of strikes anymore. As far as locally, I saw, this is a long time ago, the Detroit News and the Detroit Free Press was about the only memorable strike that I've seen in the last maybe 15 years. Some people go, oh, Mr. Norton, yeah, did you see the Detroit teachers? They went on strike. Not really. They just kind of called off on those days. In Michigan, it's technically supposed to be illegal for teachers to go on strike, and we're not going to get into why that is, but it is. Have I seen someone actually go on strike for teachers? I have, and it was even brought up that when they did it, they were kind of breaking the law. And I think it was the Wayne Westland School District that did that, but again, that's not something they were supposed to do. Some other things. So we already talked about what collective bargaining is. We talked about what strikes are. That's two of them. We also have something called binding arbitration. And basically what happens is you basically have one side present their arguments, and then which would be the employer, and then you have another side and the employees bring their arguments. And then this is going, beforehand you have to agree that whatever decision comes out, that's it. You can't sit there and go, oh, well, if I don't like the decision, then, yeah, we're just going to go back on strike, or I'm not going to honor it. So basically, after you give your two sides, you have one person who acts as an arbitrator, so they make a final decision as to what's going to happen between the two groups. And it's supposed to be that you stick with it. Like I said, you can't just sit there and be like, just kidding, yeah, I didn't really like what the arbitrator said, so, yeah, I'm out of this deal. No, you're supposed to actually stick with it, too. And the other thing, too, we've already kind of talked about, government can take action if the strike threatens national security. The government basically places what's called an injunction in play on the work stoppage and basically makes it illegal. So, I mean, it's not that like you can apply that particular portion to the school teachers in Michigan, because that was more at the state level. So that's just like it's considered one of the vital public services that the state has, and so therefore they made a law basically outlawing it. So, all right, so getting through this, final check for understanding. Can you describe what a union is and the methods it uses to carry out its purposes? Can you explain how unions gained and lost power in the 20th century? And can you describe how unions negotiate with employers in modern times? If you can, well, just like the song was in the beginning, it's going to be a good day.